How do we shift the experiences that we're having in our life? I'm really pleased to have the co-author of The Gift of Shift book on the show today. Her name is Tracey MacDonald, and she is a life coach and has just an incredible background in being able to help people to really start to live that life of happiness and joy that we all choose to experience. So I hope you'll join us today. I think you're going to find this a fascinating discussion.
At the end of the day, it's not about what you have or even what you've accomplished. It's about what you've done with those accomplishments. It's about who you've lifted up, who you've made better. It's about what you've given back. Denzel Washington. Welcome to Inspire Vision. Our sole purpose is to elevate the lives of others and to inspire you to do the same.
Tracey, how are you?
I am fabulous, Dr. Doug. How are you doing today?
Hey, doing great. It's so great to have you on the show. And as you mentioned, I have your partner on the show, at least your partner in crime with the book.
Yes.
But it's great to have you on the show. So tell the audience a little bit about your story. How did you come about doing what you're doing now? Because I know you were very involved in an entirely different profession for a while.
Totally different profession. Actually, my previous career, I was a dental hygienist and treatment coordinator for over 18 years. I would say, though, I've been a personal growth junkie probably since my early 20s. I went to a Anthony Robbins seminar. I don't know if you've ever been to one of his.
No.
Lift the roof off. And I think after that, I was hooked on personal growth, couldn't get enough workshops, books. And actually in my previous career, my employer, he was huge on continuing education as well, went to LVI, a lot of those continuing education courses, business courses, sleep apnea, you name it, anything on personal growth and improving, again, oneself. And it was interesting, we were talking at the beginning about assessments. I would say that was, again, a huge learning was actually when I was in the dental field. One of the consulting companies that came in, they actually did an assessment, a behavioral assessment, and it helped me recognize, again, how we all experience life differently. So you're asking me about my story. I think that was awareness pieces, again, the importance of recognizing how we're showing up in the world. And I kept hearing that you should be a coach, And my colleague, actually, he had a international transfer. We actually lived in Florida for a while. And actually I took my coach training in Miami, Florida. And so when I looked into a training, it was amazing. We talk about synchronicities and coincidences in the very first chapter of our book. And somebody recommended, you should go to this school. But when I looked into accredited, ICF school, I came across the word energy leadership. And I think every cell in my body lit up like a Christmas tree. I'm like, that's the one. And even when I looked into the program, the coincidences, like my husband never worked in Miami, and we just happened he had to work there that weekend. So even the very first introductory weekend, it was already, the hotel and everything was paid for. So it was really cool. So that's how it kind of initially got started into coaching. I met my beautiful colleague, Anne, that you had the pleasure of meeting, my co-author. She's absolutely phenomenal. On that very first day of the training, we instantly hit it off. And we ended up doing workshops together. Actually, with The Gift of Shift, the book that we're discussing today, was one of the title of the workshops. We did many. And actually, I flew to Montreal to meet Anne there. And that's where we delivered the workshop, The Gift of Shift. And I mean, over the years, she's been saying, we should write a book. And I'm like, I am not an author. She has this natural ability of journalism background and that. I mean, I've been producing content for years, but not in written form. And other people have mentioned that you should write a book. And I'm like, yeah, no. And as you've learned from the book, the synchronicity of when I was meditating, how it intuitively came in, Gift of Shift, personal stories. And hence now we have the book. When I reached out to Anne, I'm like, okay, this is what we're doing. I don't know how we're going to do it, but this is what I feel that we're meant to do. And she was totally on board.
And you did it. You said something that is going to fascinate me, and I want to get into it a little bit, maybe. You talked about, and it's because I have a real interest in, behavioral um, analytics, and, are people really living their life the way, are they being really honest with themselves and living their life? And I'm curious, what type of behavioral analyst evaluation did you do?
I did DISC profiling. And what was interesting that I learned with DISC is how much I more am concentrated on people, where other people may be concentrated on the task, and how that can be such a breakdown in communication. I mean, I do DISC in my own practice along with emotional intelligence. My absolute favorite is energy leadership index assessment, which is an attitudinal assessment. It helps people recognize some of their behavioral patterns, how they show up when they're under stress, and also how they show up in their normal day to day. What was one of your favorites, Dr. Doug?
Well, for me, and what I find interesting is I love this concept of really speaking your true voice. And what I have found, and I also use the DISC, I use a 4D. I don't know if you're familiar with the 4D, but where that
No,
really
I'm
gets,
actually not. No.
oh, it actually adds some additional things to the DISC test to where you really get your motivators, your values, all of those types of things also. And what I found interesting over the years that I've kind of worked with personality profiling is that in most cases, people are living somebody else's life. And as you
Yes.
know, in the DISC test, at least the one I'm using, you have the 3 different levels. You've got your core personality, you've got your public personality, and then you have your conscious personality, or what they call mirror personality. And what I find interesting is most people are living in that public social personality. And I always talk about the fact that, okay, there's 2 ways to live that, because it's not a bad thing to be there. But the reality is when you are living as though you are supposed to be, or are you doing it as you choose to be? And
Yes.
there's a big difference, because I see a lot of
Huge.
people living the lives of their parents, their teachers, their friends, everything except who they really are. And it sounds like when you did that, that all of a sudden you discovered that, even though I'm sure, for 19 years or 17 years, you were loving the dentistry and so forth, but your personalities, I guarantee you're an ID, right?
Bingo, right? I'm totally I. I was a high, actually, it was IS. A lot of steadiness
IS?
there.
Okay.
IS was my profile. And as I said, it was a lot on focus on people.
Yeah.
And I tended to shy away from D personalities, people that were very dominant in personalities. I would shy away, but I didn't understand, again, because I think, again, that's the beautiful awareness. You start to understand that it was nothing personal, is that they were more about the task, and that's how they showed up, and that's how they perceived life. And I think that was a huge aha moment for me.
Well, and I love that there are different tools, and obviously you've used different tools. When I was on your website, I saw a statement that I really loved, and in fact, I copied it. Uh, Although it's not copyrighted to you, so I knew it was okay.
Totally.
Carl Jung.
Oh,
Until you
yes, yes.
make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. And
Bingo.
let's talk a little bit now about your contribution to the book and some of the things that you have discovered. What motivated you for life coaching? Was it a personal thing, or was it just the fact that you're a high I and you just really wanted to help people?
I think it was such a gift in my own life. Like, self-awareness was such a massive gift in my own life. I think when you have a gift that you're excited about, you just can't help but share. You just can't help but share, because you're like, oh, it can just improve your life in so many aspects. I mean, I truly do believe that when the student is ready, the teacher will appear,
Yes.
right? And meeting in the awareness piece. And so it's like, okay, I think it's a part of service. How do I want to give that back? And when the student is ready, maybe I'll be that teacher. And also, I'm going to be a student as well, because you learn from people. It goes both ways at all times.
That's true. So your contribution to the book, The
Yeah,
Gift of Shift. Let's talk
yeah,
about that.
sure.
So what do you have different levels or different steps that you did, or how was yours a little bit different than Anne's, or how was it similar to Anne's, or where did that go?
Yeah, we both used inspirational stories, to inspire mindset shift. And it was interesting. We both took different themes that we tended to teach or talk about in our coaching practice or in workshops, which again, a lot of times it reflects our own life, what we tend to be more passionate about, what we share about. And so a lot of my stories that I share, I'm huge on that little voice in our head that can be a jerk sometimes. And so that, right? And I'm talking about the inner critic. Some people call it the self-sabotage or the saboteurs or the gremlin. Got these new ear pods, so you'll maybe see me push them in a little here, Dr. Doug, as they kind of pop out. And so that, of course, I wanted to share that story about how our inner critic can impact everything if we're not aware of how it shows up in our life. That was my second story. The first story was on synchronicities and coincidences, which is really about noticing life. That's the big piece of it.
Well,
Those are the
let's
first
talk.
two.
Let's talk about synchronicity for a minute and relate it to awareness, because what I have found is, in many cases, this aspect of awareness is really something that is missing in many people's lives. And when I say that, it's just that they're aware that they're not really experiencing what they want to experience, but they're not aware of what's causing it. And of course,
Yeah.
as you put in on your website, until you make that unconscious conscious, you're going to just be assuming that this is what it is without realizing. And so the question is, how do you help people? Well, and this may be rhetorical, because if you're helping people, they were aware enough to know that they needed help. But have you ever run into people who were not really aware, and yet in some respects they needed help and maybe wanted help? How do you help them to become more aware?
You know what? That's a beautiful question. People, as you said, you don't know what you're not aware of. And so some people, and I'm sure you experience that, they come to you for one thing, but when you get to the root of it, the tip of the iceberg, and you get to underneath it, it's usually the awareness pieces is how are they getting in their own way, right? For example, someone can come to you and say, I need to work on my organizational skills, for example.
Right.
But when you dig into it, what do they really need? They need healthy boundaries. They may need to learn how to say no. They may need to stop people pleasing. So sometimes they're not even aware how it impacts how they show up. Or it's kind of like the same girl, that attracts the same guy with a different face. There's a reason why that she's attracting that. Could be the wounded helper, wanting to help somebody that's not wanting to help themselves, whatever. But they tend to come from one area. But when you start to do the work, help be that mirror and really help them see things in a whole different light, they walk away with way more that they initially came for.
Well, that's true.
Conscious.
Well, and
Yeah.
now, do you use any type of emotional scale at all, emotional guidance scale or anything like that?
The very first thing that I do is that energy leadership index assessment. And when I start off with that, as I said, it helps people connect the dots, how thoughts create feelings, and based on how they feel, they will act a certain way. And then that ultimately leads to the results. And as you go up the emotional scale, like for example, when you're in victim thinking, and everybody can experience victim thinking, but how long do you reside there? How, are you there majority of the time? And so meaning victim to thoughts or victim emotions or circumstances, these are I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not pretty enough thoughts. So as you go up the emotional scale, I mean, when you think of it, when you're under stress, our normal periphery, I think it was Richard Bayatsa said 170 to 280 degrees is our normal periphery. When we go under stress, we go into 30 degrees tunnel vision. So you don't notice opportunities and solutions in that vibration of energy or in that reality, right? So the more you go up the scale, you know, into some of the higher where you're more absolute passion for life, or where you're tapping into creativity, or even a little bit, you know, in between that level of service, the energy is different. Your thoughts are different that create certain feelings, and then your actions are different on that. But it's to recognize the drivers, the BS belief systems that are creating the thoughts that are helping you feel a certain way, and then creating those actions. Does that make sense how I'm explaining, Dr. Seth?
It really does. And what I find interesting is, as you mentioned, oftentimes you know, you're with the same person, different face, but exactly the same person. And what I find interesting when you get into that emotional scale is that we tend to put off the vibrations of where we are residing. And and in many cases, people don't realize that they're residing down in that victim or in that anger or wherever that happens to be. And therefore they are going to attract, because, you know, the energy that goes out comes back. They're going to attract the similar type of people who are in that emotional scale. And if they haven't attracted them, they're going to bring the people who are a little bit higher level down with them anyway. And so it gets very fascinating to realize that. And I think I saw somewhere where you were talking about the mirror. You know, I love to tell people, you know, if you're really experiencing a miserable life, just hold up a mirror.
Yeah.
Because that's where the cause really is. And so as you get into the book and share some of the stories with the audience. I'm really wanting to hear some of your stories, and, you know, what you have discovered and how you're helping.
Yeah, I would say one of the stories I was sharing about was the inner voice. I think it really, awareness starts with that. I mean, that was a huge awakening for me when I was actually reading Eckhart Tolle when it first came out. I think it was called The New Earth. I don't think it was called The New Earth when it first came out. And he was sharing about that little voice in her head. And I remember reading the book, I'm like, I don't have a little voice in my head. And as I kept reading, it said, if you just said you don't have a voice in your head, that's the voice. And I actually burst out laughing. I'm like, oh, okay. And then I started becoming aware of this voice. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it never shuts up in there. It narrates everything. It narrates everything. But that was such a turning point for me when I started to recognize, again, how I was seeing the world, how it was being reflected back to me. And as you were saying, just even the energy, your energy speaks to people before you even open your mouth. And as you said, what you're putting out there, it can't help but being reflected back, because that's how you're perceiving the world. For example, when I first got a Jeep, right? I was like, oh, no one has a Jeep around here. I went and drove off the Jeep off the lot. And as soon as I, you know, bought the Jeep, they're like, oh, by the way, you're part of a Jeep club now. You have to wave at every Jeep. I'm like, okay. Well, I drove up the lot. There were so many Jeeps around, right? My hand was constantly in the air. Like, not everybody bought the Jeep the same day. It's because my focus started to see things differently. So when we're in that lower vibration, our focus is on things of what's wrong, or, you know, what's missing, and all those different thought processes, right? Versus when you're focusing differently, like, what are the solutions? What are the opportunities to learn? How do I look at this as a setback? What question can I ask myself to help me move forward? Then our focus is in a different way of processing things, and we experience life differently because our focus is different.
Well, and I love the concept of that curiosity that you talk about. That really is a secret, isn't it, for people to kind of break away from wherever they happen to be, is a level of curiosity. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's just being curious. It's being curious about people, especially, I mean, when they show up a certain way, there's always a reason why people show up in a certain way. I mean, you being in the dentistry field, I mean, we were based in people's most fearful, most times situation, you know, that they're feeling loss of safety and control, especially like someone's right over them. And so it's just to recognize that, you know, how do you see people for, you know, what they're actually experiencing? How do you become curious instead of judging why people, you know, see the world that they do? I actually did a workshop just on Thursday. And you know those slides of the young woman, the old woman, you can see something, the same picture.
I have that on my slides too. Yeah.
Right. And so some people see a young woman, some people see an old woman. I showed my friend this. I'm like, what's the first thing you see? She said, it's a monster eating a woman's head. And I'm like, really? I didn't even know that was an option, you know? And so, and the whole point is that we experience and see the world. We don't see the world the same. And if I could scream that from the top of my lungs to the whole universe, is to really get curious about people, because we perceive differently, we see things differently, and you will have breakdown in communication if you don't really take that in and start to understand people. And I think top leaders, that's it. They become very, very curious. They're like, I want to know what my blind spots or what I'm not seeing, and getting a real good look at what's going on, because I don't experience life the same as everybody else.
Well, and in the book, you've got this inner critic, the gift of BYOBFF. All right, come on. I'm dying to know what that stands for.
Be your own best friend forever, Dr. Doug. It really is about talking to yourself with more self-compassion. It's to recognize, you know, how would you talk to yourself, to your true best friend, someone that really has your best interest in mind. I'm guessing you wouldn't do it by tearing them down. You would do it that help them, you know, lift them up, or, you know, dust them off if they're going through a challenge, and, you know, help them jump back into the ring of life. You know, hold that space for them, even if they do need to cry. You know, recognizing what their gifts are and help them recognize, you know, they can do this, that they can learn the skills, they can again be able to shine their light if they allow them to. You know, it's recognizing how you talk to yourself will impact how you show up, and especially how you show up to others, but also how you show up authentically for yourself.
Well, and you know, I don't know if you've read the Fifth Agreements.
I love that book. Yes.
Yeah. And I love what he talks about there, is that we've created our own movie of life. And
yes.
And everyone has their own movie, but the reality is it's all based on our rearing up, our parents, our friends, our spouse, you know, our family, everybody, our teachers, and they have created that belief system. Well, we have allowed that to create a belief system within ourselves that creates the movie of life for ourselves. And,
yes.
you know, how on earth do we, if we're at least aware enough to realize, okay, you know what, here's my life, I don't like it.
Mm-hmm.
What are my beliefs that are creating this life? And how do I change them? How do you help people to, you know, filter out the judgment, the criticism? How do you, that self-sabotage, how do you help them to, once they're at least willing and aware to do something about it, how do you help them to recognize some of those areas that are not great and some of those areas that are really great, and they should maintain that belief system?
Yeah, and I think it's coming back to that word curiosity. How can you approach yourself even with curiosity? I mean, even the inner critic, a lot of people think it's like you need to fight the inner critic. Well, actually, I would suggest that I think what people are surprised is that I say meet it with understanding. There's a reason why it's showing up there in the first place, is to keep you safe from experiencing certain emotions, right? Don't speak up. What if you're judged? Don't stand out. What if someone doesn't like you? Here, play small. You never have to be embarrassed. Oh, you know, play small. You'll never have to feel shame. Oh, play small. You never have to feel that rejection. So it's a part of us that is actually trying to keep us from experiencing certain emotions. So it's not fighting against yourself. It's just to recognize there's a part of you that, may have served you when you were younger. But then how do you want to show up knowing that you're an adult now, knowing that being stretched outside your comfort zone is really where growth and expansion is going to take place? Because if you stay small and in that safe space, I guarantee you're going to be bored. You're going to feel self-defeated. Nothing grows there. It just nothing grows there. So it's to recognize you got to get outside your comfort zone in order for growth to happen. I think that's the biggest thing in regards to the inner critic piece, but also recognizing what are the thoughts that are you saying to yourself that supports that, to help you recognize what skills you want to be. Get really clear on taking off the mask, Dr. Doug, as you said.
Yes.
What do you value? Who do you want to be is a big part of that. And then it's also making those choices every single day that develops the habits on who you want to be. If I want to be someone who's more athletic, then the choice is, if I may not feel like going to the gym, I'm getting my ass up, putting on my sneakers and going for that run, right? Because your habits build on who you want to be, but you have to start making those choices, and it'll be uncomfortable at first if you're trying to choose something that you're not used to, but it's how do you develop those habits? I love James, I think, is it James Clear? I forget his name right off the bat, but with every action that you take is a vote for the person who you want to become. Every action that you take is a vote for the person you want to become. And so it's to recognize, how do you make the votes add up to who you want to become? And it's really creating those new neural pathways in the brain. And again, stretching yourself out outside your comfort zone, because it'll want to be like, hey, this is unfamiliar. We don't like this. I'm going to haul you back.
Well, and it's interesting as you talk about that. The thing that comes to my mind is habits, and recognizing that our response, in fact, our perception to any event that occurs in our lives, is merely a habit of going in and digging in all of those unconscious beliefs that are literally affecting our response to whatever that event happens to be. I tell the story often, and you'll appreciate this. So in my dental practice, I used to treat what dentists call TMJ. Now, I used to have a patient come in and they go, "Doctor, I have TMJ." And I'm going, "Okay, actually, you have two. You have one on the right side and one on the left side. So now tell me, what's your problem?" "Well, I'm getting headaches, I'm getting this," and they tell me it's TMJ. And I'm going, "Well, okay, let's really figure out what's going on." And so I was taught to really get in and get to the root cause, which in most cases, and if I conflict you a little bit, sorry about that, it has to do with a neuromuscular and a musculoskeletal relationship. It has nothing to do in most cases with, quote, the TMJ. And what I find is, in many cases, people come in and say, "I'm depressed, I'm anxious, I'm this, I'm that, I'm this." And it's like, okay, but what's the root cause? What's really causing this to occur? And most people are not willing to do that deep dive in to say, all right, let's really look at this and figure it out. Because I think in many cases, they're afraid. There's a tremendous amount of fear about change. And, we get into this habits, but they have to realize that their life is just a habit. And as you say, you have those neural pathways that have been created as habits and as responses to anything that occurs. And why don't we change those? Why don't we change those? Why don't we go back and change those? So as you work with people, how do you help them to change those limiting beliefs, those, things where they're kind of shooting themselves in the feet? How do you help them to really get back and overcome that?
I think the biggest thing is to really recognize, as you said, it's bringing the unconscious conscious, recognizing what are even the beliefs that may be driving the behavior. If someone believes that money is the root of all evil. Well, good luck in attracting it and keeping it.
Yeah.
It starts, right? It's starting to recognize it. And I think another big component of that is the words that you use to say to yourself, and the pictures that you create in your head. I mean, going back to your example about an example in the dentistry, I remember this woman came in and she was having a complete panic attack out in the waiting room. She had a phobia of needles. And so I brought her into one of the operatories. I had some time to spend with her. And it was amazing. I do also do neurolinguistics programming. I'd say, I'm like, tell me, I said, what are you picturing right now? And she was picturing this massive, massive needle. I'm like, where are you? And compared to this picture of the needle, she was on like this small. I'm like, well, no wonder you're freaking out right now, right? And you can actually play with those pictures, draining out the color, pushing it away, making it more normal size. So even the pictures that people create in their heads can totally scare them, or just how they experience life. So it's even bringing some of those awarenesses. I mean, even time. How people experience time is so different from one person to the other. Have you noticed this, Dr. Doug, when you were going into practice? Like, I could look down at my day sheet and say, on time, this person will be 10 minutes late. This person will be probably 10 minutes early, because they had a way of processing time. I mean, some people are experiencing, if you did their timeline, some people are through time where they see their memories from right to left, and some people experience them when they're in time. Their past is behind them, or in front of them, or some people it's up and down. So even how people process time, like, oh, if I'm early 5 minutes, some people are like, oh, I feel anxious, I'm too early, I'm just going to show up. Or other people like, I'm going to be anxious if I'm late, right? So I'm going to show up 5 minutes late, whatever. So it's even how people experience time is all internal stuff. I find that amazing. So it's just even helping them recognize, how do you do decisions? How do you experience time and do time management? It's more than just writing out a schedule. It's what's really going on there. And that's the beauty of what I do. If anything, they get a real cool look, and I'm sure you do this as well, Dr. Doug. They get a real cool look of who they are, especially let's whip off that mask and see what's actually there.
Well, and it gets so fascinating when all of a sudden you're really looking at all of that. I mean, how many people do you deal with and work with that are struggling in their relationships, or they have people at work or even in the home that they consider just really difficult, really a pain in the what? How do you help them to figure out how to improve that and how to better deal with it?
Yeah. And it's going back to recognize, as you said, when we were talking about earlier, is that we all see the world differently. And to recognize, okay, how do you get in alignment with your values? And also, how do you want to take responsibility for how you show up and who you want to be in regards to no matter how they want to show up? Or what are the deal breakers, or what are the boundaries that need to be placed? So it always starts with you. You have no control over the other person. You have influence, and it's great to become a master of influence. Yes. But you have no control, and it's to recognize that right from the beginning. Otherwise, you drive yourself crazy. We're in relationship with everything. We're in relationship with time, with people, with decisions. We're in relationship with everything. So again, how do you want to define that relationship and show up and be responsible for who you want to be with it?
So what do you teach them?
I would say, again, coming to what they value. That's the biggest thing, is if you value something, right? If you get to know who you are, I think that it's honoring that is one of the biggest things. But it's also to recognize, what are they making up about certain situations. MSUing, I remember my instructor, she goes, we all have masters in MSU. We make shit up, and they actually trademark Kickstart Your Head, right? We all have masters in MSU. We make shit up. And it's also to recognize, what are we making up in relationships? Someone could talk to you in a certain tone. You could be like, well, that's disrespectful. Well, is it, or is it they're just really fired up in, the way that they're communicating? I think it's just to really strip down and get people really clear on the facts, what they're making up, and also who they want to be. I think that has an impact, but also again, the healthy boundaries piece. This person is doing this. Well, it's like, okay, then what's your even 2% in all of this, and how do you want to show up in regards to it?
Well, and I think we've grown up with this concept of you made me do this, or you did this to me, or you did that to me, or,
Yeah.
whatever. And recognizing, I heard a story just the other day and I loved it. My daughter was talking to me, and of course, my poor kids have grown up with this. So, it's, we laugh about it a lot, but she was talking to someone who was just angry and ticked and, really sitting in that anger emotion.
Yes. Yes.
I think he's stuck there. But anyway, going on, and he's just trying to, trigger and trying to do this and trying to do that. And she tells me she's just sitting there and acknowledging, yeah, okay. And it's getting him more upset because she's not responding. And it's because she learned that, whatever comes out of their mouth has nothing to do with me. It has everything to do with them.
Bingo.
So
Bingo.
What's interesting is, where do you lie on that emotional scale? And
oh, totally.
Where do you really lie? And it's really funny. I mean, I was taught back when I went to school for this, I went down onto the streets of Hollywood. And one of the things I was supposed to do was go up to a complete stranger and go, so what do you think of my hair? Now, at the time, it wasn't this light, it was much darker, a little bit longer. But anyway, you'd go up and you go, well, what do you think of my hair? And some people would just start giggling and say, oh, it looks great, or what a silly question. And other people, get out of my way. Don't bother me.
Yeah.
I'm busy.
Yeah.
And what I found is when you catch someone off guard, their true emotional level comes out. So when I was working with people who were in the hiring range in their company, I said, one of the things you need to do if you really want to know without testing where this person is, just ask them an off the cuff question that is so stupid and see how they react. And you're going to find out whether or not they're sitting in anger, they're sitting in frustration, or they're fitting in joy and whatever. So I think the interesting thing is, how do we help people to understand that, number one, this may be where they're stuck. Now, not to say that we all go through anger and sadness and all of that, but where are they stuck? And then how do they move up? You had talked about moving up that scale to going from, say, victimhood, which is at the bottom of the scale, all the way up to joy and happiness and freedom and creativity, which is near the top of the scale. How do you help people, number one, recognize where they are, and number two, start to move up?
Yeah, I would say with that assessment is what I usually, that in itself, it brings awareness to their normal pattern, as you said, about the victim mentality of someone that's their total primary is anger, right? Which are thoughts of conflict. And as you said, if you ask them a random question, there would be, it would show up that way. It even shows up in the assessment. And anger is actually a very powerful emotion, and it actually it's more powerful than victim because it helps you, kicks you out of victim thinking.
Yes.
And it's more a focus on who's to blame. So if anything, it's like, that's actually a bump up in the emotional scale. And so it's improving emotional intelligence as well. I think I mentioned that, I know I mentioned that, which kind of parallels with your story about how I became more curious about people. That again is a higher emotional scale, because when that man that jumped out of the chair, had no idea. This was back in my dental hygiene days. I was working away on a gentleman. He had super sensitive teeth. It wasn't written in the chart. Start to scale. He jumped out of the chair, Dr. Doug, and he was so beyond anger, a very aggressive, finger in the face, and you have to hit I won't say it, effing tooth in my head. Like I was completely baffled at that moment. Where did my thoughts go? Which again, I didn't have awareness about the emotional scale or anything back then. I could look back and recognize it. I went right into victim thinking. I am such a sucky hygienist. But I didn't stay there long. I went up the emotional scale, like, what a freaking jerk. I can't believe he's talking to me this way, right? Way more powerful. Now, obviously, learning about that and training the brain differently, I'm more apt to go into curiosity and ask myself, what's this really about? What's he trying to communicate to me? I'm in pain. I want you to stop. And so with that, I can acknowledge, I can validate him, his experience, which then diffuses some of that energy. I mean, even if he storms out, I can really show up in a way to respond, not react. I can help try to, see him, really see him, try to connect with him, and give that compassion, whatever needs to be done in that moment. And how he responds or how he reacts, that's his responsibility. But then I can become more responsible versus feeling like a victim, or like say, okay, let's go, buddy. There's a difference. It's more of understanding comes from that. And again, that's a higher vibration.
Well, and I love how you talk about the fact that in communication, and you talk about how you deal with difficult people, how do you improve relationships? Part of that is communication and realizing that, quit thinking about the next thing you're going to say in a conversation and actually listen. And listen to the point where you're asking questions. As you say, curiosity. Well, what did you mean that? Well, tell me a little bit more about that. Well, what do you mean? And all of a sudden, you begin to understand that this is what their real meaning is. And so often you have, because of your own beliefs, created an entirely different meaning from their words than what they actually intended to mean.
Bingo. And back to what you just mentioned about relationships. Communication is a big piece of that needs to be put in place to create even more solid relationships. Even that curiosity, what do you mean by that? What did you take that to mean? What were you trying to share? Any of those, really just being open to receiving. And again, you have to be in a different energy. When you're in conflict and you're completely ticked off, you're closed down. You
That's
might
right.
as well go for a walk, if anything. Go for a walk or whatever you need to do to get yourself more centered before you have that conversation. It's to recognize even how you show up in certain energies. You're going to create more defense in other people. So it's even becoming to how do you bring certain energy to a conversation is going to impact how you communicate, because 7% is only words. I mean, I could be saying, I'm fine. Two different complete meanings.
That's right.
So
That's right.
it's
And your body language was different too.
Huge tone, body language, the energy I present. It's not just words. People's like, well, I said this. I'm like, well, you said that, but what were you really saying?
So what would you say is your personal main message in The Gift of Shift, your book?
I say the theme between both Anne and my stories is the power of choice. It really is about increasing your self-awareness and recognizing where you have power of choice. Biggest thing.
I love that. And I love the statement that I found, you can either act or be acted upon.
Ooh, yes.
And
good one.
If you choose to act, that's a great way to go. If you choose, and it is a choice, to allow people to where you're being acted upon, now you're a victim, you're in that situation, and that never plays well in your life.
Yeah. Bingo.
So how do people get a hold of you? Because this has been great. Yeah, I mean, you're incredible. I love the enthusiasm. I love all of that. You can tell.
And I love our conversation, Dr. Dunn.
I'm not a high. Have you figured that out yet?
I kind of did.
You'll be surprised. You'll be surprised, but maybe not. So how do people find you?
Yeah. Social media. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Facebook, Tracey Mac Coaching. My website, traceymaccoaching.com. So TRACEYMAC coaching.com. that's where you can reach out to me. Shoot me an email. I would love to hear from you. If you read the stories, I would love to hear your feedback from people. Absolutely. I love connection. It's the I and me. I love the connection.
And how do they find The Gift of Shift? How do they find that book?
Yeah, they can find it on any major online retailer. It's in my hometown, for the ones that are watching in my hometown, at Chapters, Barnes and Noble, Amazon carries it. Yeah, absolutely. Love, love,
Great.
love
Final message.
sharing.
What is it that you want the audience to understand?
I want people to understand the power that they hold, the power of self-awareness, but also, again, just the beautiful gifts that they have, their love, their light. We tend to shrink it, but how do you become more connected to it? How do you give yourself permission to shine it? And again, just how do you connect to something, that deeper meaning within you? And it really is a gift to give yourself in this lifetime, and I think we get so caught in doing. I think the saying says it all, we're not human doings, we're human beings. And how do we come back to our being?
Yes. How do you be rather than do?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a whole nother conversation.
Oh, it is. It totally is, Dr. Doug. I could talk about that forever. Yeah, absolutely. Could talk
Well,
about that
Tracey,
forever.
thank you so much for being on the show. This has been great. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I loved it. Thank you so much for your sharing. I really, really appreciate it.
Oh,
It
you
was
bet.
absolutely fabulous.
And
Thank you.
folks, the book, The Gift of Shift, it's really worth getting in and reading that. And meanwhile, I hope you enjoyed it. We hope you'll join us again soon. This is Dr. Doug and Tracey MacDonald. Have a great week.
Have a great week, everybody.